Well, hello, everybody. This is Doug Reeves in Boston, and I'm joined by Kim Marshall in Brookline, Massachusetts. Kim will be leading our discussion today, but I want you to know that you can use the question function or chat function on your webinar to let me know any questions that you'd like me to toss to Kim during this webinar. In addition, we are recording this, so if you have colleagues and friends who are not available to be here live with us, we'll be happy to share the video and audio portion of this with you for listening at your convenience. We'll also post it to our website at creativeleadership.net. Just a few things by way of introduction. Most of you know Kim Marshall is the editor of the Marshall Memo. You can find more about that at marshallmemo.com. Kim has been a leading authority on synthesizing the latest and best research from over 60 journals every week. It is the best value in education and a way to start a great faculty meeting, to keep yourself on top of latest trends and research, even when you don't have time to read a lot of the journal articles that are out there. In addition, Kim is the author of a number of books, but perhaps most relevant to this discussion is Rethinking Teacher Supervision and Evaluation, published by Jossey Bass, now in its second edition. And you'll find in that book a number of really thoughtful ideas based on Kim's extensive experience as a urban school principal, as well as a leadership coach around the United States. So Kim, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, and it's a lovely day here in Boston. We finally got some spring in the air. I want to just quickly tell the story of how I got into this. As a principal in Boston, elementary school principal, I was using the conventional approach to teacher supervision and evaluation, making extensive notes and talking to teachers, talking them through them and writing up a great narrative, and I was very good at that, but really came to believe after a few years that it was not very productive, and began casting around for a better way. One of our teachers suggested a different approach, and I tried it and ended up using it successfully for 9 years, and then started writing about it, giving workshops on it. And so this is just a very brief kind of overview, and I hope you'll react as we go along. Shoot your questions in to Doug, who will relay them to me. And by the way, I noticed I have the date wrong on our slides here. It's actually May 2nd now, right? So sorry about that. So here are the big questions I want to address. Is what's wrong with the traditional system, the system that I was trained in and many of you were trained in? And isn't there some new thinking out there? And indeed there is. What's the alternative that I'm suggesting, the alternative that I stumbled across as a principal in Boston and have now refined to quite a system that's being used in many places around the country? Rubrics. How do rubrics fit into this idea of short, frequent, unannounced classroom visits, which I'm going to present? Because rubrics are kind of a different animal than the observations of classrooms. So how are they being used, and how should they be used? What about research? What does the research say about new approaches to evaluation of teachers? And then the question that comes up quite a lot in my consulting and travels around the country is, okay, lovely idea, but it's too hard. It's too hard for many principals. They don't have the ability to do this. So those are the questions I'm going to attack. So we should be advancing here. Sorry. Okay, there we go. So what is wrong with the traditional system? I have three major criticisms of it, and I believe these are really sort of built-in design flaws that can't be overcome through any amount of training. The first is how long each evaluation takes. Done right, the traditional system involves a pre-observation conference, a full lesson observation with extensive note-taking, then a write-up or a scoring on a rubric, and then a post-observation conference. Really 4 hours if it's done right. And that's a lot of time, which means that it's going to happen very infrequently, perhaps once or twice a year. Second design flaw is that because of the pre-observation conference, in most cases, the observation is announced in advance, which means that the teacher, being a normal human being, is going to put on the best possible show. It's just, it's a natural thing. Of course, you would put some extra effort into this, what is sometimes called the dog and pony show. And that means that the principal is seeing, or the assistant principal or department head is seeing, not typical daily performance, but atypical optimal performance, which is lovely for the teacher if it goes well. It's very nervous making because you got to get ready for it, and if it goes poorly, then that's your big chance. But it doesn't tell the principal the most important thing, which is what's happening on a daily basis, because that, of course, is what drives student achievement and everything else. And then the third criticism I have, this third design flaw, is that is that if the principal does it well, the administrator does the job well, they're going to be providing an overwhelming amount of feedback. And no athletic coach would work that way. No driver ed teacher would work that way. It's simply not the way you coach somebody, is to give them a huge amount of information once a year. So those are the design flaws. And that means that it's really not going to be productive. And indeed, if you look at the research, as I have over the last 40 years on effective schools, you never, ever see teacher evaluation mentioned as one of the key drivers of school improvement. And that's because it is basically inert. It's not really helping. A principal in Long Island said to me a few years ago, every time I do an evaluation, it takes me out of the game for 4 hours. So he had the right idea. So here's sort of a graphic way of looking at this. There's a fork in the road that administrators have to take. Are they going to take the left fork, which is evidence, evaluation, and compliance, basically kind of a bureaucratic process? Or can we somehow figure out to take the right fork, which is actually using this process to improve teaching and learning? And given a choice, Robert Marzano talks about this frequently, given a choice, everyone wants to take the right fork. Everyone wants to be improving teaching and learning. But the way the process has been implemented over these 50 years, it's largely the left fork. It's largely evidence, evaluation, compliance. I was with someone a couple of weeks ago up in Maine who said, he literally says to teachers, look, you know this is a waste of time. I know this is a waste of time. Let's just get it over with. So and one of the most damning pieces of research on this was the widget effect study done a few years ago by the New Teacher Project that showed in Chicago at this point, this 5-year period from 2003 to 2008, look at the ratings of teachers in the Chicago public schools on a 4-point scale. Now, I have to tell you, I've been in a lot of Chicago schools in my coaching work 15 years ago, and this is not accurate. So how could this happen? How could you have this skewed statistical picture here? It's because, of course, people are putting on their best show, and principals are perhaps avoiding difficult conversations and giving these excellent ratings. Here's Elgin, Illinois, with the 3-point evaluation scale, similar distortion. And here's Denver, which at that point had a 2-point evaluation score, again, similar distortion. Very, very few teachers being negatively evaluated. Now, I'm not saying there are a lot that are horrible. I think there are very few really bad teachers in the business. But these stats are just way, way off. So that's what's wrong with the traditional system. So let's move on to the second question, which is other new ideas. So I've been reading very carefully. My Marshall Memo reading every week is a good sort of 8 hours every Sunday, reading through what comes in. I subscribe to everything and then range widely beyond that. And I've been following this debate, and here are some 10 ideas. Let's start with the first one, which is, I heard a Brookline principal say this years ago: hire excellent teachers and just get out of their way. Leave them alone, let them do their work. You can see the flaws in that approach. And here are the others, just very quickly, that are out there being talked about and being considered. Double down on the traditional system. Provide better training for principals and assistant principals. And there's a lot of this going on around the country. Third one is look at lesson plans. And I know schools, my son-in-law taught him one here in Boston, where they asked him to hand in the whole week's lesson plans on Monday. That's what he spent the weekend doing. And then the administrators would go through them with a red pen, and not a productive use of time, because I think Tuesday's lesson plan really needs to be predicated upon what happened on Monday. And also I think unit plans are more productive in general. But you see these huge binders of evidence and lesson plans and so forth, and I think this is just not a good use of time. Fourth one is there are a lot of clever programs built into iPads and tablets and iPhones to go into a classroom and to fill out a checklist in real time to actually score a lesson on a 4-3-2-1 scale. And again, I think this is very unproductive. It keeps the administrator from being a perceptive observer, walking around, talking to kids in a nice way, introducing themselves. Then there's the real-time coaching. Now, this is one of my big pet peeves. There are some schools, not many, but some schools where the administrators come into a classroom, and if they see something wrong, they take over the class from the teacher and demonstrate how it should be done, or they coach in real time. And I wrote an article about this for Kaplan a couple of years ago because I really think this is intrusive, and this is something that drives teachers out of the business. It's simply not respectful to teachers. I think the coaching needs to take place afterwards, one point at a time. We'll get to that in a minute. Then there's the idea from Harvard to have teachers record videos of themselves and submit those to administrators to be viewed. Video is a tremendous professional development technique, but not, I think, for evaluation, because of course teachers are once again going to submit their best work, and again the administrator may not have insights into the daily practice which really drives student achievement. Wyoming had this bright idea of bringing in a camera to a classroom unannounced and recording an hour of instruction and then using that to evaluate the teacher. This could lead to a heart attack. This could lead to kids acting out. This could lead to, again, an inaccurate picture of daily practice. Clever idea to get around the dog and pony show. So then cameras in every classroom. I've been in schools that actually have cameras going all the time. Parents may be able to log in. Administrators can log in. Never have to leave their office. But again, Big Brother watching and really losing the essence of what's going on in classrooms. Using student surveys, I think, is a good idea, and I do advocate that, the Tripod Project, Panorama, and others, but I don't think they should be used for high stakes. Pittsburgh Public Schools are still using the data from student surveys as 15% of teachers' evaluations. I think not a good use of data. I think as a coaching tool, terrific, but not for that. And then finally, there's value added. The clever statistical formulas for evaluating teachers based on their students' test scores. And this idea, fortunately, now has been thoroughly discredited. The researchers, American Association of American Statistical Association, AERA, have now said this should not be used for high stakes because it is so unreliable. Okay, so those 10 things, what do I think of them? There you go. I think they're all ineffective, and I've studied this very carefully, and I think there's a lot of support for why these are not. So let's get constructive here. What is the alternative to either the traditional system, which is not working very well, and these new ideas, all of which are flawed? So here is a one-slide summary of what I've been doing myself as a principal for 9 years, and then have been advocating and getting other people doing, and many people are doing this very effectively around the country. So just very quickly, here's the summary. Short, frequent, unannounced classroom visits. I advocate at least 10 per teacher per year, which comes to about a couple a day in most schools. And systematically sampling, because teachers teach about 900 lessons a year. So this way you're sampling about 10 of them, which is 1 in 9, which is a small number. But if they are unannounced, frequent, and systematically spaced out through the school day, through the lesson, through the year, I think you can get a remarkably accurate picture of teachers' work. Each one of these visits, I believe, should be followed up as soon as possible, same day or within 24 hours, with a face-to-face conversation with a teacher, ideally in the teacher's classroom when the kids aren't there. Really a humble gesture by the administrator, having a conversation, focusing on one coaching point. Paul Bamrick-Santoya talks about a leverage point. So I think that's the best technique here. Then a brief summary of that. There's one program, computer program, that limits the administrator to 1,000 characters, which is a paragraph. I'll show you one in just a sec. No scoring, no 4, 3, 2, 1 scoring. That sours the whole coaching relationship. Then, of course, looking at curriculum unit plans, dropping in on PLC meetings, teacher team meetings, same subject, same grade teacher team meetings. Always talking about student learning, but not in an officious kind of data-driven way, but in a way of how did that lesson go? Did you get your intended learning results? How was that quiz? How was that exit ticket? Then using the rubric, and I'll show more about this later, at the end of the year to sum up all these interactions, all these classroom visits, conversations, and other points of contact, keeping it medium stakes. That's the key point. Not a high stakes scoring kind of officious thing, unless, of course, the teacher is showing major issues, in which case you shift gears and get into an improvement plan. If you want to find 3 districts that are doing this really well, Manhasset, New York on Long Island has been at this for years with strong union approval and is doing a great job with it. Hamilton County, Chattanooga, Tennessee has been at it even longer. I've been out there a number of times. They're doing a superb job. And the Uncommon charter schools have a system that is quite similar to this. So there's just a brief summary. So if you have any questions at all, please throw them in, and I'm happy at any point in this to get into those. Doug,
I'm monitoring the questions, so none yet.
Do you have any questions at this point?
Not yet.
Okay, great. So here's a breakdown. So the objective of many observations is to do 3 things: to see reality, to see what the kids are really experiencing on a daily basis, to get a realistic picture. Second thing is, of course, to have a good eye for instruction. And this is the superintendent's job, to make sure that each principal Assistant principal, department head, supervisor, instructional coach has a good eye when they go into classrooms. And then the third thing is how do you get it through to the teacher? How's the feedback going to be gotten through? So it's really heard and followed up on. So here are the details. And this is just a quick summary of a workshop that usually takes 6 hours. So we're squeezing it here. To see reality, again, I think the visits need to be unannounced, frequent, short, and systematic. So unannounced because any announced observation distorts reality. Then teachers actually quite quickly get used to this. It's not a big deal. They kind of prefer this. Frequent, as I mentioned, I think about once a month, about 10 times a year is a good target. Some people advocate for more. Short, the amazing thing is that in 10 minutes, you see a remarkable amount. In fact, when I play 10-minute videos for audiences or when I make classroom visits with administrators just 10 minutes long, usually there are 7 or 8 significant compliments to give the teacher and an equal number of coaching points that one might make. So 10 minutes, I think, is really when the research is done, and this is really going to be found. And then, as I mentioned, systematic to make sure that you're sampling beginning, middle, and end of lessons, that you're seeing different days of the week. In elementary school, that you're seeing reading, math, social studies, and science. In secondary, that you're seeing of the 5 classes that a teacher teaches, that you're seeing a reasonable mix of those. Not all of them perhaps, but a good sampling. So that's the key thing of seeing reality. And again, teachers, when this is explained well and when administrators handle it well, teachers rapidly like this much better than the traditional system. Okay, the second thing, to have a good eye, I think administrators need to come into classrooms humble, curious, and low tech. Low tech being not a laptop, not a tablet, not a smartphone, but a pad of paper, a note card, to get those good quotes, but not to be furiously writing the whole time. Curious is a good mindset to come into a classroom with, like, how's this going? How are people handling this? How are the kids doing? And humble is really important because you're coming into the teacher's castle. Many teachers are not used to a lot of visitors, and you got to come in a humble fashion. Your body language. I always tell men, take your jacket off, be informal, and don't don't interrupt. That's one of my things. So then, of course, being observant, and the challenge really in a short observation is what's most important here. I'm seeing a lot. I'm seeing things that are going well. I'm seeing things that I have questions about. How'd that go after I left? And really sort of zeroing in the conversation with, what's the most important coaching point here? And then, of course, you got to look at the bigger picture. What are these teachers' goals for the year? When in my last year teaching, one of my big goals was tightening up my classroom management and working with my colleagues. So you have that in the back of your mind. What did I see the last time I was here? What's the unit plan that this lesson is part of? You have that general picture as you come into a classroom. So that makes you, I think, a good observer. So then the best way to give feedback, and I'm really passionate about this, is face-to-face. I think there's a temptation for administrators to want to send a quick email or leave a quick note with the teacher. And teachers, of course, are a little nervous and curious about what the administrators saw. I really advocate saving that until the conversation and having that as soon as possible afterward. And that's when you can really get into, so tell me a little more about your thinking about that, or what did you hope I would notice, or tell me what was going on just before I came in, or that little girl who was so caught up in the lesson, what made that happen? Questions like that really get the ball going and get the teacher talking. So it's a two-way conversation. And those conversations don't have to be long. If the administrator comes in well prepared and thoughtful, but also with an open mind, they can be like 10 minutes long. Courageous, because sometimes you do see things that are not going well, and there you need to step up. And I think some people even rehearse these conversations beforehand with a significant other or a colleague to make sure that they approach it in the right way. But you got to step up. I mean, if you see things, if you see teachers being sarcastic or snarky, or if you see kids who are disengaged, or if you see mediocre worksheets going on all the time, then you need to say something about it. And then the last piece is where a lot of people are getting hung up, is we've all been trained to write these long observations. And I think this is a trap. If you feel like you have to write an hour and a half of writing and pull it together and everything, that's too much. And it takes too much of your time and will slow you down. So I advocate this program. It's called T-Eval. It's from Tennessee. That limits you to 1,000 characters. And that actually I have found as a paragraph is enough to make your point and to really summarize what happened. Nothing new. You're just saying, as we discussed, here are the things that were going well, and here's the most important point I want you to think about. So those are the 10 key things of many observations. Now, here, anytime I ask teachers up front about this, or administrators, what are your worries about these many observations? Here are the things that often come up. 10 minutes is ridiculous. How can you see? What can you see in 10 minutes? Best way to deal with that is show a video. People are often just turned around on the spot. Oh my God, so much happened. Teachers, of course, are nervous that you might come in at a bad moment, and everyone has bad moments. Teachers are afraid you'll disrupt the class. You'll throw the kids off. You'll throw me off. I'll lose my thought in the middle of a sentence. A lot of people feel these short visits are a gotcha. So people need to be reassured about all these. They won't have a chance to explain. Again, the conversation is where that happens. Some people miss the pre-observation conference. That's their chance to sort of put their cards on the table. But a good administrator can see, and with the conversation to supplement it, can see what's going on, and the conversation can fill them out. What are you looking for? And this is an important point up front, is administrators need to be clear when you come in for these many observations, what is it? What's on your mind? What are you looking for? And my suggestion on that, by the way, very short list. What's supposed to be going on here? What's the curriculum? What's the objective? How's it going? How's the teaching or the learning experience is going? And how's the learning going? Are these kids learning it? And those are things, if they're in the back of your mind, you can zero in on. Some teachers don't trust their administrators. Some teachers don't think they know their subject area or their particular area of expertise. And administrators, this is another point about humility. Administrators do need to be humble about, I haven't taught kindergarten myself. Tell me what's your lesson objective here. Tell me what's going on here. Tell me, about the student learning. You can have that conversation without being an expert. Equity is a big concern with many teachers. Will some teachers get more of these many observations than others? And I think administrators need to keep careful track of this and make sure that it's equitable. And I think all teachers, from the best to the newest and the least experienced, need to have these frequent visits. Some people don't think administrators can keep it up. And this comes down to keeping everything short. And then finally, can you really evaluate a person based on these short visits? Again, my experience is that administrators should take the leap of faith and trust that 10 short unannounced visits with dialogue is actually much more accurate than any of the other systems that we've talked about this afternoon. So those are the worries. And in fact, teachers can be reassured on all these things, all these worries. So here's one of the major insights is we used to think that when you come into a classroom, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, that every minute you're there, you're learning more about the classroom. So if that's true, you need to stay the whole lesson. But in fact, most of us know that this is the way it works. When you come in, you learn a lot very quickly. In the first 2 or 3 minutes, there's a steep learning curve about the vibe, what the teacher's doing, how the kids are behaving, the content, the pedagogy, and so forth. You learn a lot very quickly. Then I think your insights plateau at about 5 or 10 minutes. And then your new insights begin to go down, which means that's now you're not spending your time very productively. And I think this graph, which most people say, oh yeah, that's the way it is a reason for getting out of there after 10, sometimes people say 15 minutes. Now, of course, sometimes you're coming in the middle of a lesson, sometimes you're coming in toward the end, but basically the graph works the same way in different situations. And I think when the research is finally done on this, we're going to see that 10 or 15 minutes is the optimal amount of time. So,
Kim, just two quick questions.
Go ahead.
One more objection that wasn't on your list is, what if the administrator is not an expert in the subject matter? This is particularly a problem in secondary school.
Yep. So there again, the humility is a key factor. The lesson plan is a key factor. And really the conversation, this is what makes the conversation so crucial, is for the administrator to be able to say to the teacher, look, I'm not an expert in Algebra 2. So kind of walk me through this, and get the teacher's thinking and explanations. And here, really, the teacher is educating the administrator. But at the same time, there are generic things. For example, I remember sitting in on a calculus class somewhere in New York, and I didn't understand any of the math. I didn't remember that. That is gone from my memory. But I could also see that the pedagogy was problematic, and the administrator I was with was able to talk to the teacher about the pedagogy. Now, the administrator I was with, who was a math expert, they also knew that the math was solid, but the pedagogy. So I think there's that humility. But again, the face-to-face conversation is so crucial.
And one more, if it is one of those bad days, do you allow teachers to have a do-over and to say it's like the Olympics throughout the Hungarian judge?
Yeah, there's a school district I'm working with here just south of Boston, Sudbury, that actually negotiated that as part of the union contract, was that there was a signal, like a bunt signal, that the teacher could give if they felt it was a bad moment, and the administrator could come back later. So yes, I think there should be something like that, a mulligan, what have you. But again, if that's happening every time you come in, then it's a different conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, so why the face-to-face conversation? People are busy, teachers are busy, administrators have got a million emails, parents, everything else going on. I just think it's important to make time for these conversations, partly as a gesture of respect to the teacher, that it's worth my time to come up to your classroom and have this conversation. But I think here are the main points about it. Conversations are quick and efficient, much more efficient than writing up a long, email or evaluation checklists and so forth. It's less threatening and bureaucratic. If it's not written down, especially if it's not electronic, then the teacher is more likely to be receptive to learning and perhaps even to admitting mistakes. Teachers, again, can fill in things that the administrator didn't see. Right after you left, behind you, you didn't see this particular thing, or this is something I'm worried about, help me out with this, so that you can have that fill in. The teacher can disagree. Perhaps the administrator has a different philosophy of the way a classroom should work than the teacher, and they can have a pedagogical debate. And of course, the key thing is, are the kids learning? So what's the evidence of learning? And hopefully a humble administrator, even if they don't particularly like an instructional approach, might say, well, something, I do see in your exit tickets that almost everybody has this, so good for you. Keep doing that. You kind of convinced me there. Teachers can and should in these conversations do some intellectual heavy lifting. They should be actually, kind of thinking things through. Okay, I see what you're saying there. I need to rethink this particular approach. The feedback, of course, can be differentiated. A brand new teacher is going to be handled a little bit differently than a veteran teacher. In some cases, a veteran teacher might be encouraged to write an article, to do a podcast, to give a presentation to staff members, to publish their unit plan. A brand new teacher who might be weeping at the slightest criticism needs to be handled differently, with kid gloves, encouragement and support and so forth. And then, of course, in these conversations, these brief conversations, you can get into other things. Teachers can talk about aspirations. They can talk about their dream of teaching another grade level, of working with a colleague and so forth. So I think these face-to-face conversations, quick in the teacher's classroom, if at all possible, are a wonderful venue for professional development, not only for the teacher, but also for the administrator. You learn a tremendous amount about the struggles they have, kids who are keeping them up at night, worrying and so forth, and also joys, wonderful, funny, moving moments in the classroom. Here's a photograph that I took, or no, somebody gave me of a teacher, and the teacher's on the left there, and you see the informality of this, kind of perched gesturing when you were over there on the rug with the kids, etc. Those kinds of conversations, I think, can be so productive. So here's this software I mentioned. I do not have a financial interest in this. I think they've done a wonderful job. These three guys down in Tennessee. You see the website there. This is the one that limits the administrator to 1,000 characters. Also has built into it, an opportunity to tag the day, the date, and also was it the beginning, middle, or end of lesson, to keep track of that, because you want to be simple. And when you send these brief things, and here's a sample. I'll let you just skim through this one. This is Sarah Scroggin, a secondary administrator in New York City Public Schools, and this is one of her actual T-eval write-ups sent electronically to the teacher.
And Kim, let me ask another question while people are going through this.
Yeah.
How is coaching different between observation of a first-year teacher versus a veteran teacher?
Well, I'm for having many observations for all of them. Again, to have this short, frequent, unannounced routine, I think the conversation is really where the difference is. With the kid gloves, softer, more directive approach, perhaps with the new teacher, the more collegial shared kind of wisdom conversation with a veteran, although there are some veterans who need, frankly, who need their butts kicked, who are getting complacent, who rest on their oars and so forth. But I think, I think you want to handle people differently, and you want to, this is where a lot of emotional intelligence comes in, is reading the vibe with a person, seeing how open they are, how defensive they are, and handling it well. I have a number of suggested sort of tee-off questions that I do share with people. If a new teacher is really struggling, then I think reinforcements need to be brought in. Organizing a mentor, a coach, somebody in addition to the administrator who's there for longer periods of time, who does more detailed and clinical kind of follow-up with the teachers. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So you can see that Sarah's write-up here of this teacher, this English teacher in the Bronx in New York City, builds on the conversation. Now, there is this temptation to send the written feedback first, and I see this a lot. And some teachers actually want that. They want to know first. I really advocate for having the conversation first, because again, the administrator may have gotten it wrong, may have misunderstood. The teacher may have additional information. The administrator may even change their mind about the coaching point in the conversation. So I think the quick summary afterward is the way to do it. Jot notes, talk to the teacher, and then do this quick summary, send it electronically. The teacher can write back, although Sarah tells me that mostly they don't, because they've already had the conversation, and then move on. And Sarah also tells me that the person who wrote these said it takes about 10 minutes to do these once you get in a groove. It's quick. So here's a little graphic of, because time is of the essence here. Time is the key variable in schools for teachers and administrators. We don't want to waste a minute. So here's a graphic of a scale model of the traditional model of teacher evaluation. About 30 minutes for the pre-observation conference, about 45 minutes in the classroom, taking a lot of notes, a couple of hours to write it up, more in some districts like Chicago where it's extensive evidence is asked for, and then the pre-observation, post-observation conference. So that's 4 hours. Here is one mini observation drawn to scale. Approximately 10 minutes in the classroom, approximately 10 minutes for the conversation later that day, the next day perhaps, and then usually in the late afternoon, maybe even the evening, but 10 minutes for the short write-up. So that's half an hour. So in the same 4 hours that this administrator spent with the traditional thing, a different administrator over a period of days can do actually 8 mini observations. There's really no comparison here in terms of the opportunity for coaching, the opportunity for learning, the opportunity for appreciation, affirmation, the opportunity for just good conversations about teaching and learning. There is no comparison here. I'm not saying that the traditional thing is a complete waste of time, although often it is. But if talking in terms of an administrator's time, every minute counting, look at the comparison there. You've been in 8 different classrooms. You've had 8 conversations. Teachers have gotten 8 write-ups compared to 1. Each one focused on only one coaching point. I think this graphic really tells me how powerful this approach is if it's done well. So let's address these worries. Okay, not enough time. You can see a heck of a lot in 10 minutes. And usually you have to play a video to convince people of this, or actually make a classroom visit. You'll see a bad moment? Sure. Okay, everyone has bad moments, but in 10 observations, that's only 1 out of 10. So it's going to balance out. You'll disrupt my class? Well, guess what? When you do this a lot, the kids get so used to it that they even ignore you when you come in, which is kind of insulting. But kids don't even look up in most classes where this is happening. They gotcha? No. Now we're going to see the whole picture of your work here. And with the conversations, gradually you'll be reassured about this. We're going to talk every time. So you will have a chance to explain something that you thought I might have misunderstood. Something we can do without the pre-observation conference, and even Madeline Hunter, the great Madeline Hunter, wrote an article in 1986 saying the pre-observation conference is not a good use of time. Much better to get into a classroom and then talk about it, and to look at unit plans, because unit plans are the bigger picture. What are you looking for? Well, my old way of looking at this was SOTEL. The 5 things I think administrators should have in the back of their heads are safety. Is it safe in here, psychologically, physically? What are the objectives? That's the O. What's the purpose of this lesson? How's the teaching going? That's the T. E is for engagement. How engaged are the kids? And you can see that pretty well in 10 minutes. And then learning. What's the evidence of learning? Checks for understanding, exit tickets, student writing, looking over their shoulders, and even chatting with kids. So that's what what I advocate is actually a shorter version of that, which I mentioned earlier, which was the which was just what's the purpose, how's it going, and what's the learning. Don't trust your judgment. Well, actually, I'm on a learning curve too. I'm not perfect, and I'm willing to be humble about this. Equity, I really think the administrator should make a promise, that everyone's going to have the same amount of these. You won't keep it up? Well, it's my goal. It's my personal goal. I'm going to try to do 10. And again, in most schools, it comes down to about 2 a day. Given the ratio of about 27 teachers to an administrator, which is fairly common, if you do the math, it's about 2 a day. And that even allows for some days where you don't do any at all. And then the fairness issue, most people are convinced, and I do anonymous clicker questions on this, that 10 unannounced visits with conversations and feedback is actually much more accurate than the traditional system. So people can be convinced of this. Okay, any questions at this point?
Let me check.
Okay, so what about?
I'm sorry, just one more.
Yep.
You use student outcomes to coach skill building with teachers.
But I think in a very low key way. So again, looking over kids' shoulders, chatting with kids, and then sharing what you hear with the teacher afterward. Looking at papers that students have written, worksheets, exit tickets, looking at clicker question data, and then dropping in on team meetings. How are the assessments that they're designing, which measure student learning, and then the PLC meetings or the shared, the collaborative team meetings where teachers are looking together at their assessment results, common assessment results. All those are lower key ways of having a conversation about student learning without getting into the test score value-added trap.
Thank you.
So rubrics. What about rubrics? This is another one of my pet peeves here. So here's Charlotte Danielson, an amazing, smart, thoughtful woman, very pro-teacher woman who in 1996 wrote her framework for teaching, which was basically deconstructed teaching into 76 subcomponents. She really did a lot of work on this and deserves huge credit for this very thoughtful job of taking teaching apart and then at each one of these 76 things describing 4 levels of performance, from outstanding to proficient to needs improvement to not so good. And at first, her rubric, she calls it a framework, it is a rubric, was used more as a coaching tool, which actually was her desire, was that it be a coaching tool. Piloted in charter schools and so forth. Then the MET study, the Measures of Effective Teaching study, the big Gates-funded study came in a few years ago, 2013, and they really embraced the idea of rubrics to evaluate teachers. They looked at 4 rubrics, Danielson's being one of them, and they embraced this, and all of a sudden the country just went crazy about rubrics. So all across the country and abroad too, rubrics are being used now as teacher evaluation tools. And I think they have certain advantages over narratives, but the more I looked at rubrics, and this is the tail end of my principalship, and then the last few years, I've developed 2 major concerns about rubrics. The first is they're too long. 76 components, even smushed to 22, which is Danielson's current configuration. It's a very dense document. It's 24 pages long. And then Marzano's and the others, these are long documents. And in terms of the busy world of schools, I think they're often too cumbersome. So the second concern is that a lot of people have gone into using rubrics to evaluate an individual lesson. And I think this is a major conceptual error. Rubrics really are a comprehensive description of the whole of teaching, the whole job of teaching. And to come into a classroom with a rubric in a clever iPad application or something and try to score an individual classroom on a rubric is, I think, a huge mistake. It changes the whole nature of the observation. It makes the administrator a much less perceptive observer. And it changes the conversation with the teacher into a coaching, talk about teaching conversation into a judging 4, 3, 2, 1 scale kind of thing. And also gives way too much feedback at once, which is a big mistake, again, that no athletic coach would make. So with those 2 in mind, I designed a different rubric. And again, my rubric is free and open source. It's out there, it's being used, adopted in a number of states. And some people tweak it. The Roman Catholic schools here in the Massachusetts area have added a different domain for their religious mission. But I want to use my rubric as an example of how I think a rubric should be used. I'm not trying to sell this rubric because it's free. but I want to use it as an example because I've got it in my computer. So the first decision that any rubric writer has to make is, what are the domains of teaching? How are you carving up teaching? Now, every rubric does this slightly differently. So here's my approach, and here's one example. Let's talk about planning and preparation first, unit and lesson planning. Let's talk about classroom management, because without that, you're nowhere. Then let's talk about actual teaching, the delivery of instruction. Then, and the researchers would say this is tremendously important, perhaps the biggest one of all, is monitoring, assessment, and follow-up. Like, are you checking for understanding? Are you fixing learning problems in real time? Then, of course, family and community, which is a big, big component. And then finally, your work as a professional, how you work with your colleagues, do you get your paperwork in on time? What's your attendance? My rubric actually has a line for teacher attendance, which I think is tremendously important. No substitute is as good as a teacher of record. So here's one page of my rubric, and just to give you a sense of, I think what you would look for in any rubric, whatever rubric you use, is does each domain fit on one page? Because then you can get a picture of a person's performance. So I look back at myself in my 9th year of teaching, Martin Luther King School in Boston, and I evaluated myself on this very important page. So looking at this page, you can see that Kim has got a problem in area E, recognition. Well, according to this rubric, I do not have any work posted. For some reason, I didn't do that. And on this rubric, I get a 1. I get a does not meet standards on that. There are a couple of other areas, criteria and self-assessment, where I was mediocre. I consider level 2 performance as mediocre. I was solid in the other 7 areas, and look at that last column, the top column there, not one single highly effective rating. So this gives you a general picture of Kim's performance on this page, and also very specific feedback to Kim. Now, how's he doing overall? Effective, okay, so I'm effective on this page, not getting fired on this page. But you can see the advantage of a rubric when it's used well at the end of the year. Again, this is summing up the whole year's performance, is it gives you both clinical and holistic feedback. Now, here are the 6 pages of my rubric, right? I put them on one screen here. And just, again, you get this sort of very detailed data. So planning and preparation for learning, the first domain. Kim is, and this is real. I mean, this is me looking back at myself as a 6th grade teacher in Boston after 9 years of experience. This page is a little better. There are 3 highly effective ratings here, overall effective. Classroom management, my weak area. Even after 9 years, I still was scoring improvement necessary, level 2 on this page, and you can see the weak areas. Real game plan there for improvement. If I'd been given feedback like this, delivery of instruction, mixed, overall effective. We just looked at monitoring assessment. Family and community, overall effective, 3 mediocre areas, 2 outstanding, and here was my strong point, professional responsibilities. This is partly reflecting my desire to get into administration at that point. I was pretty strong at the outside classroom stuff, very strong in certain areas, so I was highly effective. So Kim's overall performance in these 6 domains, you can see visually here, and again, this is what you want to look for in a rubric, is does it give you this visual, detailed picture? So here's the last page of the rubric that sums everything up. There are my 6 domain ratings. What's my overall rating for the year? We can eyeball it as effective. So, but underneath this general data, at the previous page is all the detailed data, which would be amazing feedback for a teacher. It is important to get the teacher's input, and I strongly advocate that. So here's how I think a rubric should be used, okay? But before we do that, let's just talk about, if I were sitting with my administrator at the end of the year looking at all this data, the administrator should push me, okay, Kim, for the next year, what are the areas where you want to grow? What are your goals? No more than 3 goals. And looking at what we just saw, it's kind of a no-brainer, okay? Classroom management, Kim. Read Fred Jones's book. Get your routines in order. Have a limit-setting thing. Use preferred activity time. You need more differentiation. There's not enough differentiation in your learning stations that you're using. And I think I would come up with this. I need to open my door and work more with my colleagues. So those are what should grow out of the rubric at the end is improvement goals for the following year. So again, here's how I think a rubric needs to be used. It's the end of the year summation of all these other things that are going into the principal's brain. So many observations, at least 10 conversations after each one, brief narratives. Dropping in on those team unit planning things, looking at the quality, especially the assessments. How are the assessments? How's the unit planning? How are the essential questions? Then those data meetings, how are those going? This is where we talk about student learning for the whole team. Parental observations, input, praise, maybe complaints, professional development, other activities in the school. He runs the chess club. And then this crucial element at the bottom there, teacher self-assessment. The teacher actually filling the rubric out themselves and doing a comparison. So when to use the rubric? Not during a classroom observation. That I think is really going to distort the whole process and prevent the administrator from doing a good job of observing. Not afterward. New York City is doing this, sitting down afterwards and going over Danielson scores. I think that's not a good idea. My photograph here is a little humorous on that, but I think it does not produce a good coaching conversation. Rubric is to the end of the year. And so I think 3 points in the year is when to use the rubric. At the beginning, to do a self-assessment. Teacher sets no more than 3 goals. If you use the rubric the year before, of course, you can use that to set the stage at the beginning of the year. Then in the middle of the year, around mid-January, doing a check-in. And here's how I think it should look. On the left is the teacher's self-assessment on this page. On the right is the administrator's tentative, just as what I've seen so far in pencil. And they compare, and you'll notice that on this page of this particular teacher, there are 2 disagreements. Look at the second line there. The teacher gave herself an effective, the administrator gave her a highly effective. That's a quick conversation. You're absolutely right. Or the teacher may push back and say, I'm not there yet. And then look at the last line, okay? The teacher gave herself an improvement necessary. The administrator gave her a does not meet standards. So that's an important conversation. And at that point, the administrator should probably have some evidence, probably have something to go by. And again, the teacher may present evidence too and may talk the administrator out of that. But that's in January. It doesn't count yet, but it's a heads up on anything that may be serious. So let's go back here. So then I think doing that again in May or June, at the end of the year, at the end of the rating year. Again, teacher input, look at each page one at a time, discuss differences. Probably no point in discussing the areas where they agree, but the disagreements, talk about those, and then come to closure. And now, of course, if in November there are problems, major problems in the classroom, the teacher needs a heads up at that point. Maybe fill it out at that point. Certainly have an improvement plan and clear notice about unsatisfied. There should be no surprises at the end of the year. So used well, I think rubrics are very powerful, and I'm convinced that they are far better than the old system. They provide a shared understanding, a common language about what's good and not so good in classrooms. They're objective. If there's more than one administrator in a district, they're all reading from the same hymnal there. Definitely is a push toward excellence. So level 3 is solid performance. That's the way the rubric is written. Any rubric is written, but yeah, people want to be A students, and it definitely pulls them in that direction, which is good. The next improvement step is, if it's a well-written rubric, is described in detail. So if you're a level 2 on this is what it looks like to be level 3. Okay, it's easier for a teacher to accept criticisms out of 60 items than from a narrative, perhaps. It's a natural shift from the coaching that takes place during the year to now we're evaluating. Now we're actually putting in writing how you're doing on this 4-point scale, which I think is the right scale. It's quick. An administrator can fill out my rubric in about 20 minutes. It is not time consuming. You may have noticed how little space there was at the bottom for comments. That is deliberate. Basically, the rubric is doing people's writing for them. So it's quick. And the leadership team of a school can look at data. Check this out. So here is a small school, and these are the 6 domains. I'm just using my rubric as an example here. So you can see there's a lot of green, a lot of solid teaching, quite a lot of blue, especially Marcia and Mark. Look at those 2. Those are kind of the very strong teachers in this school. So a leadership team, this is of course confidential, the leadership team sitting down, perhaps the superintendent sitting down and with some lead folks and the assistant principal looking at this, some things would strike them. First of all, Marcia and Mark, strong teachers who can be leaders and mentors and coaches and PD presenters. Then look vertically at the monitoring, assessment, and follow-up, the 4th column there. So even with Marcia and Mark, this is the weakest area. And then look at the guy at the bottom there. Look at Richard. So he has got some serious weaknesses here and some mediocre performance, but notice that he is strong in classroom management. This is a teacher who might fly under the radar. Never sends kids to the office, no parent complaints, you walk by, things look fine. So if you don't get in there and really look at what's going on, you wouldn't notice that. So, but he's a red flag. So I mentioned that level D, column D there is the weak area. Look at the data in there. There are 10 subcomponents. And here we see the details, again, for professional development, for training, for mentoring, and so forth. The third column over, on the spot, formative assessment, is weak across the board, even Marcia and Mark. And then the interim assessment piece, the whole PLC piece, is also weak across the board. So we have all kinds of guidance as a leadership team from the rubric data. So this to me is the reason why you really work hard to get the rubric to be accurate scores of teachers so that they can actually get the feedback themselves, and so the whole school can look at the data like that. Okay, any questions on the rubrics?
Just one, and that is with respect to instructional coaches that we have in the building, do they use the same rubric that the administrators use?
Well, I think everybody should be reading from the same SOM book here, but of course the coaches are probably not evaluating. They're probably more in the soft in the nice word, coaching role there. But I think the common language across the board should be used. One slide I cut out here, which I want to mention, and this is especially true for coaches, is I made a list from an article of the things that a rubric can't evaluate, that you could never find in a rubric. For example, sense of humor. And you know, a coach might build on that, either a lack of it or a good sense. Comfortable in your own skin. You know, you can't have that in a rubric, but it's an important part of teaching. You know, makes the job look easy. These are the kind of things that a coach and administrator would mention that are not on the rubric, or it might even write up in the open space at the end. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so next to last question here. Is there research? What's the deal? What's the research saying about this mini observation approach that I've been talking about? So unfortunately, there are no gold standard studies so far of schools and districts doing mini observations. They're out there, but the research has not been done yet. However, I believe that many observations support 7 factors that the research and common sense tell us is really important to improving teaching and learning. First of all, relational trust. A lot of research, especially out of Chicago, has really, Tony Brick and others have really put a lot of findings into this idea that relational trust is one of the keys to effective schools. Fostering professional working conditions. This is what keeps teachers on the job and enhances their effectiveness, is when you have this sort of good working climate in the building. And I think these many observations really build on that. Teachers being visible, principals being visible around the building, visible instructional leaders getting into classrooms and so forth. That's the essence of many observations, talking to teachers about their work. Teachers getting frequent and specific feedback. That's the essence of this. Early intervention. Like, wouldn't it be good? And doesn't the research tell us how important it is, in common sense, to get in there early, September, October, and change practices that are not working well and prevent problems before they get really serious? Developing the whole formative assessment piece. This is one of the main things I think administrators should be looking for in classrooms, is the whole checking for understanding, on the spot formative assessment piece, which is so important in the research. And you see that when you're in classrooms a lot. And finally, getting a student's eye view of teachers' curriculum planning and data work. Like, what does it look like from the kid's side? As you look over a kid's shoulder, what's the what's the quality of this work that they're doing? So these things, I think, are reasons to believe that when the research eventually is done on many observations, they're going to come through with an A+, because they, again, executed well. They really do get at the most important things that the good schools have always been doing. So I'd say let's not wait for the research. Let's embrace this now. So what effective supervision can accomplish, and this is what any system should be held to, these 4 key things. First of all, can the administrator, the superintendent, the principal, the assistant, can they give quality assurance to parents? Can they tell the public and parents, we have virtually every kid in this school is getting good teaching virtually all the time. Good, solid, effective or highly effective teaching. That's quality assurance. Second thing is, are people getting feedback? Does the system you're using give feedback to everybody, not just teachers who are having problems, but teachers who are doing well? So you keep them on the job and motivate them and appreciate them. Third thing is, are you motivating your folks all the time? Are you getting them to bring their A game every day? Are you getting them thinking about their work on a regular basis by questioning, by praising, by appreciating, by criticizing? And finally, does the system of evaluation you're using allow you to make good personnel decisions? That is, decisions to keep a first-year teacher because they're showing promise even with their struggles, to give professional status or tenure to a teacher at a certain point, whether it's 3 or 4 years into their job, or to, if necessary, to put on an improvement plan and dismiss a teacher. Those personnel decisions are absolutely crucial. Also awards. So can you give quality assurance, feedback, motivation, and good personnel decisions, make those, and have it be manageable for administrators? And that, as I work with principals, as I have over the last 16 years, time and stress are the major things on people's minds, and whatever system you have has got to be manageable. So again, think of that thing of one observation taking 4 hours versus 8 different many observations taking place in the same amount of time. That's what you got to keep in mind, and the rubric being quick. So the final question, and we just got a few minutes left here, is this doable? Can people who put on their pants one leg at a time, put on their shoes one at a time in the morning, can they do this? Is this just too hard? So here's my take on that. In terms of time, I took a school where there are about 27 teachers, and the administrator there's one administrator, and he or she is trying to do a couple a day. And so I drew to scale here. Look at Monday, okay? There are too many observations. Those are drawn to scale. That's a total of 20 minutes in a day of more than 6 hours. Then on Tuesday, they fit it in 3. Wednesday, 2. Thursday, 3. Friday, 2. So far the time's looking pretty manageable, right? You can do a lot of other things. So now I've added the conversations. The red bars are the 10-minute conversations. And again, look at the bottom there to see the total number of minutes for each day taken with the conversation and the mini observations. And then here I've added in green, I've added in the write-ups. And notice when the write-ups are being done, either early morning on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, or late afternoon or evening on the other days. And we're fitting them into the day, but we're not taking away contact time. So in terms of time, I think this is absolutely doable. You can fit these into the nooks and crannies. And then I believe that actually the structure of many observations makes this easier, not easy, but easier than the traditional method. So here are the 5 design elements that I think make this a pathway to improvement and also something that's doable. First of all, when you're in a classroom and you see daily reality, you're really motivated to do something if you see something that your own children shouldn't experience in a school. So it motivates you, okay? The second thing is when you're taking one leverage point at a time from each visit, it makes it much less difficult to have a difficult conversation, rather than giving a comprehensive thing. So one thing at a time. Third, the teacher is going to be less defensive if it's one thing at a time, and if it's an informal face-to-face conversation in their classroom. That makes it much more doable. Fourth, these conversations allow teachers to upgrade the skills of the administrator, to improve their understanding of what they're doing, their pedagogy, and so forth. So it's a two-way street that's going on there. So that's improving the administrator's skill. And finally, the administrator has multiple at-bats. So even if you handle one not so well, or if you miss the point, or if it doesn't come across that strongly, you're going to have 9 more of these at-bats. So I think these are the things that I think make many observations doable, even for people, perhaps a young administrator who's not very experienced, or someone who hasn't done this at all. I think this is doable. So here's a 1-slide summary. So again, to see daily reality, I think the visits need to be unannounced. They need to be short because they're surprisingly informative. To get a fair sampling, they need to be frequent. I'm advocating 10 per teacher per year. After each visit, focusing on 1 or 2 leverage points. And again, enhancing that with face-to-face conversations, looking at unit plans, looking for evidence of student learning all the time, looking over kids' shoulders in conversations, getting student input. We didn't have time to get into that, but I think kids see a lot and they're there all the time. I think the goal is to appreciate, coach, and get the overall picture of a teacher's work and tell them about that all the time, culminating in wise, thoughtful, and accurate rubric evaluations at the end. So here's my checklist. You can let you read that on your own there. To do this well.
And Kim, one more thing that one of our participants added is the virtue of these mini observations is that teachers get timely feedback, whereas in traditional ones, you might be getting feedback in May and June about something they did in October.
Oh, yeah. So again, this next day service or same day service, terrifically important. And again, one thing at a time, but frequently. So I think we may be out of time here, but any other comments, questions, thoughts, suggestions?
I want to make sure that everybody has, has The way to contact Kim, go to marshallmemo.com if you would like downloads of these observation instruments. You'll also find a wealth of other information at marshallmemo.com. If you want copies of this webinar, including the audio and video, all you have to do is go to creativeleadership.net. We'll have this posted by tomorrow. You can also contact me. You'll see my email up there. Kim does this sort of presentation all over the country, and I would really encourage that as well. Sorry. So thanks very much, Kim. I appreciate your time, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good day.